He was holding a faded, tarnished dog tag in his trembling hand, his knuckles white, as tears silently traced the deep, weathered lines of his face, and that was the exact moment I realized my quiet neighbor Arthur wasn't just a bitter, reclusive old man who hated the world, but a broken soldier carrying a ghost he could no longer bear alone. If stories like this touch your soul and remind you that empathy can heal even the deepest wounds, please take a second to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel, joining our community of kind-hearted souls who believe in grace, forgiveness, and the power of human connection. For 2 years, Arthur Vance was little more than a phantom on the edge of my life. I had moved into the sun-dappled suburban neighborhood of Oakidge looking for a fresh start after a painful divorce, hoping the quiet, leafy streets would offer some resemblance of peace. My house was a cozy, single-story craftsman, but right next door sat Arthur's property, a time capsule of neglect amidst manicured lawns and freshly painted porches. The grass in his yard grew tall and wild, choked with dandelions, while the wooden fence separating our properties leaned heavily to one side, its cedar slats rotting, grayed, and splitting from years of harsh winters and humid summers. Arthur himself was a man of few words, usually seen wearing a faded olive-drab fatigue jacket, a worn baseball cap pulled low over his forehead, and eyes that held the cold, impenetrable distance of someone who lived entirely in his own past. Whenever I tried to wave or call out a cheerful morning greeting from across the driveway, he would merely grunt, turn his back, and retreated inside his dimly lit house, shutting the door with a firm, final click that signaled the end of any potential conversation. The summer sun was beating down relentlessly on a clear Tuesday afternoon when the old fence finally gave up its long struggle against gravity. A sudden, sharp gust of wind ripped through the neighborhood, and with a sickening crunch, a 10-foot section of the rotting wooden structure collapsed into my flower beds, sending up a small cloud of dry dust and splintered wood. Standing near my porch, holding a cold glass of lemonade, I watched the debris settle and caught sight of Arthur standing on his side of the yard, staring down at the wreckage with a look of profound exhaustion. He looked older than his 70-odd years in the bright midday light, his shoulders slumped under the weight of an invisible burden, his hands resting heavily on his hips. For a moment, I thought he might turn around and walk away as he usually did, leaving the mess for another day, but instead, he just stood there, completely motionless, looking entirely defeated by a simple broken fence. Driven by a sudden wave of compassion rather than irritation, I walked into my garage, grabbed a heavy-duty pair of work gloves, a claw hammer, a box of galvanized wood screws, and my cordless drill, and made my way over to the property line. I did not ask for permission, nor did I demand an explanation. I simply knelt in the soft soil, cleared away the broken branches and shattered cedar boards, and began assessing what could be salvaged to rebuild the frame. Arthur watched me in stunned silence for several minutes, his gray eyes wide with disbelief, unused to anyone offering help without being asked or compensated. Finally, his gravelly voice broke the quiet afternoon heat, asking me why I was bothering to fix something that was clearly beyond saving. I looked up at him, wiped the sweat from my brow with the back of my forearm, and told him that no fence was ever completely beyond repair if someone was willing to put in the time to fix the foundation, and that neighborliness meant lending a hand when the weight became too heavy for one person to carry alone. A flicker of something raw and vulnerable passed over Arthur's face before he quickly masked it with a stern, gruff nod. Without saying another word, he walked over to his weathered garden shed, retrieved his own set of tools, and knelt beside me in the bright dirt, his movements slow and methodical, shaped by decades of discipline and hard labor. Side by side under the blazing sun, we worked in relative silence for the first couple of hours, the steady rhythm of measuring, sawing, and driving screws providing a comfortable cadence that gradually eased the tension between us. As the afternoon wore on, the wall of cold indifference that Arthur had built around himself began to crumble alongside the old fence. He began to offer small instructions, showing me a clever carpenter's trick to ensure the replacement posts were perfectly plumb, and for the first time since I had moved in, I saw a subtle, genuine warmth return to his tired eyes. As we paused to rest on a pair of upturned wooden crates, sipping cold water under the shade of a large oak tree, Arthur began to speak about his life, his voice low and raspy as if he hadn't used it for deep conversation in years. He revealed that he had served as a combat engineer during the Vietnam War, a time in his youth that had altered the trajectory of his existence forever. He spoke of the blistering heat, the relentless fear, and the haunting guilt of surviving when so many of his young comrades had not returned home. When he came back to the States in the early 70s, the cold reception from a divided nation had forced him to retreat inward, shutting out the world to protect himself from further judgment and pain. The death of his beloved wife, Eleanor, 5 years ago had been the final blow, severing his last remaining link to the outside world and leaving him stranded in a quiet, lonely house filled with memories he couldn't escape. I listened intently, giving him my full, undivided attention, validating his pain without offering hollow platitudes or unsolicited advice. I told him about my own struggles, about the overwhelming fear of start over from scratch in a new neighborhood, and how isolation can slowly trick the mind into believing that no one cares about your pain. Hearing my own vulnerabilities seemed to bridge the final gap between us, proving to Arthur that he was not the only person in the world who felt lost or scarred by life's unexpected trials. There was a profound, unspoken relief in his demeanor as he realized that I saw him not as a grumpy, eccentric old neighbor, but as a human being worthy of respect, patience, and dignity. By late afternoon, the sun casting long, golden beams of light across the lush green grass, the new fence was standing tall, strong, and straight, its freshly cut cedar boards smelling richly of pine and earth. It was a stark, beautiful contrast to the dilapidated structure that had fallen only hours before, standing as a physical testament to what could be accomplished when two strangers chose cooperation over isolation. Arthur ran his calloused, sun-spotted hand along the smooth top rail of the new fence, a rare, genuine smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He looked at me with a profound expression of gratitude that went far beyond the physical work we had just completed, realizing that in repairing his fence, we had somehow mended a piece of his fractured spirit. It was then that Arthur took a deep breath, looked toward his front porch, and turned back to me with a look of quiet, resolute determination in his eyes. He reached into his pocket, retrieved a small brass key, and said the words that changed everything, "There's someone I want you to meet." My heart skipped a beat as I followed him up the steps of his porch, unsure of what to expect, half wondering if there was another family member or a hidden secret waiting inside the dark, mysterious house. He unlocked the front door, stepping into a living room bathed in the soft, warm light of the late afternoon sun filtering through clean lace curtains. The room was immaculately tidy, adorned with framed black and white photographs of a beautiful young woman with kind eyes and a radiant smile, alongside military commendations and a folded American flag encased in glass. Arthur walked over to a polished mahogany side table, opened a velvet-lined wooden box, and carefully pulled out a framed, color photograph of a young woman in her early 30s with Arthur's intelligent eyes and a gentle, compassionate expression. He held the frame close to his chest for a moment before turning it toward me, his hands shaking slightly as a single, clear tear escaped his eye and rolled down his weathered cheek. He explained that this was his estranged daughter, Clara, whom he hadn't spoken to in over 12 long years after a bitter, foolish argument following her mother's passing had driven a deep wedge between them. Pride, stubbornness, and his own deep-seated fear of being a burden had kept him from picking up the phone, causing him to lock himself away in his grief while his only child lived her life miles away, believing her father wanted nothing to do with her. Arthur looked at the photograph, then looked up at me, his voice trembling with a mixture of raw grief and newfound hope. He confessed that working beside me today, seeing a stranger show him unconditional kindness without asking for anything in return, had shattered the hard shell of pride that had kept him prisoner for over a decade. He realized that life was too short to let old wounds, silence, and pride steal the remaining time he had left on this earth. Standing in that quiet, sunlit room, surrounded by the remnants of his past, Arthur picked up his home telephone with steady fingers, dialed a number he had memorized years ago but had been too terrified to call, and put the receiver to his ear. I stood in reverent silence as the phone rang, watching the agonizing suspense play out on the old veteran's face. When a soft, familiar voice answered on the other end, Arthur's breath caught in his throat, and tears poured freely down his face as he whispered, "Clara, it's your dad. I'm so sorry for everything, and I miss you so much." The silence on the line lasted for only a split second before I could hear the muffled, emotional sob of his daughter from the speaker, her voice filled with an overwhelming rush of relief and love that bridged 12 years of painful silence in an instant. They talked for nearly an hour right there in the living room, sharing tears, apologies, and forgiveness, making plans for Clara to visit the very next weekend to finally heal their broken family. Seeing Arthur stand taller, his chest expanding with a peace he hadn't known in decades, was one of the most powerful and transformative moments of my entire life. A simple act of helping a neighbor fix a broken fence had set off a chain reaction of grace, dismantling years of emotional walls and reuniting a father with his long-lost daughter. As I walked back to my house under the warm, amber light of the setting sun, my heart felt lighter and more fulfilled than it had in years, reminded that small acts of kindness are never truly small, and that hope can bloom in the most unexpected places if we are brave enough to reach out across the fences that divide us. Before we conclude this emotional journey, I would love for you to leave a meaningful comment below sharing your thoughts on this story. Have you ever experienced a moment where a simple act of kindness opened the door to forgiveness or healed a long-standing wound in your own life? If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Thank you for being a cherished part of our growing family, and until next time, keep spreading kindness, grace, and second chances wherever you go.